People say you can't ruin Thanksgiving. But my kids did. They would win in the drama. Children who hate their mother and are ready to poison her life. Mom, I listened to you while you could give me something. And now you are bankrupt. You are a problem. If you die, we will have to pay off your debts. I am sorry, but you are no longer my mother. Suddenly, in court, I will prove that you and I are only blood relatives, but I have no ties with you, my daughter told me and slammed the door in my face. My name is Lucy, and I am not the kind of woman you can evict from her own life with a slammed door and a speech rehearsed in a bathroom mirror. I stood there, cheeks still cold from the draft, and listened to the echoes die. The silence afterward was so clean I could hear the clock in the hallway argue with my heartbeat. 5 days earlier, the letter arrived, white envelope, official seal, the kind of stationery that leans on your conscience with both elbows. Notice of debt accrual, it said, the kind of phrase that sweats in polyester. A bank I'd never visited informed me that I, an allegedly sensible woman with a garden, a minivan, and a habit of labeling spices, had taken out a medical loan for $200,000. For treatment, the line item read. Treatment for what? Chronic gullibility? I turned the page and saw the electronic signature. Mine. The signature looked like me if you squinted from across a parking lot in a hurricane, close enough to fool a machine, not a mother. I called the number, and after 4 menus and a flute solo of hold music that sounded like a dentist's lullaby, a young man named Parker told me that my daughter, Ava, had authenticated everything. We spoke to your caretaker, he said, as if reading from a script chiseled in marble. Your prognosis justified expedited approval. My what? I asked. Your diagnosis of stage 3. Son, I said, if I had stage anything, I'd know before your software did. He apologized in that way that isn't an apology and suggested I visit a branch. I did. The manager wore a tie so narrow it looked like a bookmark. He showed me forms. My name. My address. My supposed signature. Each page was a hall of mirrors reflecting a woman I could not recognize. The manager explained the hardship clause, the compounding interest, the tender mercy of deadlines. I walked out with a folder that weighed as much as betrayal, then drove home, bypassing the grocery store because suddenly food felt like a rumor. At my kitchen table, I dialed Ava. She didn't pick up. I dialed again. Third try, she answered, breathless and annoyed. Mom, can we talk later? We can talk now, I said, and told her everything. There was a silence, then soft laughter, not mean exactly, just airless. Come over, she said. Let's discuss like adults. So I put on my sensible shoes and went to her place, a tidy apartment that smelled like somebody else's idea of lemons. She listened with her arms folded the way people fold them when they're holding in a confession they know will set the room on fire. Then she delivered the speech, the one about listening while I could give her something, the one about no longer being her mother, the one about court, and punctuated it by slamming my own daughterhood back at me in the form of a door. On the drive home, New York looked like it had been slightly tilted by a careless god. Even the river seemed to lean away from me. At a red light, I saw a billboard for a tropical cruise, 2 bronze people clinking glasses against a sunset that looked too expensive to paint. The caption said, "Say yes to bliss." I said yes to breaking instead, because a bus cut me off and reality prefers gawky choreography to bliss. That night, after a bowl of cereal that squeaked like penance in my teeth, I assembled a stack of documents. My late husband, Tom, solid shoulders, good hands, a laugh that climbed like a ladder, had been dead 2 years. His absence sat in the house like a sleeping bear you learn to tiptoe around. When he died, he left me a key to a bank box in Washington, D.C. Everyone at the cemetery wore weather and pity. Everyone in my widow's group later talked about inheritances like parachutes. Mine, it turned out, was a key that opened a box with nothing inside but expensive air. I learned the price of round-trip disappointment from New York to Washington and came home to a checking account that liked to play dead. So, no, I hadn't taken out a loan. But yes, it was in my name. And now the bank wanted what wasn't mine to owe. I slept like a rock skipping across a pond, brief contact, then panic. The next morning, my neighbor Ginny knocked with a casserole she pretended not to need back immediately. "You look like a woman who needs to stab the dirt," she said, lending me her long-handled clodhopper, the kind of shovel people in catalogs call a universal digger because it suggests deep character. "Garden therapy," she added. 2 aspirin and a hole in the ground. Out back, the sun sat in the sky like an old coin. My garden, square of stubborn earth and hard-won tomatoes, waited. I kicked off my shoes, rolled my sleeves, and started to dig a new pit for a clodhopper plant I'd been meaning to move since last fall. The first stab into the ground felt righteous. The second, less so. By the fourth, my arms remembered their age, and my back asked me if this grievance came with a warm compress. As I worked, my phone chimed with a message from Ava. 1 line. A photograph, actually. 2 lounge chairs under a thatch umbrella, a ribbon of turquoise sea, a caption in Portuguese I didn't need to translate to understand the mood, caipirinhas, palm trees, the expensive idleness of people who borrowed my name to buy their ticket. A second photo arrived, Ava and her husband, Damon, beaming in sunglasses as big as their nerve, each with a drink that came garnished with a small forest. I typed, "You took a loan in my name for a fake illness," then deleted it. I typed, "You stole from me," then deleted that. I typed, "You will be sorry," and deleted the future tense because I don't threaten, I schedule. I stabbed the shovel again. It hit something that wasn't earth. A sound like a bell that had swallowed a frog. I froze. Tapped again, metal, definitely. I glanced toward the fence, the neighbor's maple, the sky, as if someone might shout cut and tell me the scene had run long. I knelt, scraped with my gloves, unearthed a corner. Wood. Old, dark, and stubborn as a memory. I widened the hole, my breath hitching with the kind of excitement I hadn't felt since Tom and I slow danced in the kitchen to a song we both pretended not to know by heart. The box was the size of a small suitcase, the kind that carries secrets or sandwiches, depending on the day. I pried it free, dirt coughing off its edges. The hasp had a lock, but it gave after the third smart tap with the shovel's handle, the way objects eventually do when faced with a determined woman in an unkind mood. Inside, an oilcloth bundle and an envelope, both tied with twine that had gone gray with years. The envelope said, in Tom's blocky, patient handwriting, "Lucy, open first. If you are me, put this down, if you are you, read." My mouth went dry. If you are me. Tom's jokes had always been corny until they suddenly weren't. I sat there in the dirt, knees wet, hands trembling, and slit the envelope. A letter. 4 pages. The first 3 were covered in Tom's careful sentences. The last one had smudges, as if the story had sweat coming out of it. I read the first line, and my spine forgot about gravity. "Lou," he'd written, "there's a reason the Washington box was empty." My eyes jumped across the words like stones across rapids. "One night," he'd said, "taxis and rain, a pair of men running across a dark service road by the marsh, a bag, a stork's nest in the skeletal light of a construction site, and the sudden panic that makes honest men do dishonest things for the sake of the people they love." He'd taken the bag. He'd told himself it was temporary. He'd hidden it where no one would think to look, under our own noses, in our own ground, beneath the clodhopper that never quite took to the corner. He couldn't bring it home right away without raising eyebrows so high they would knit hats. He waited. Years. When he got sick, he panicked and set up the Washington distraction because he worried that a sudden flood of money would make everyone curious enough to come with buckets. "If anyone ever looks," he wrote, "let it be you, when it's safe." I put the letter down because my heart had started throwing chairs. I untied the oilcloth and peeled it back, and there it was, the patient, cold green of money in thick bands, the rigid glare of bonds, the whisper of cashier's checks, the smell of paper that had lived underground and dreamed of light. I touched one bundle like it might bite. Some women faint. I inventory. I counted until the numbers stopped behaving. 100 here, 1,000 there, the bands stamped with dates older than this grief, newer than my last tax return. A note clipped to a stack of bonds said, "Don't be obvious." As if Tom still hovered behind me asking me to please keep my head when fortune finally did what it rarely does, arrive right on time. My phone vibrated again. Ava. Text bubbles, a little parade. We landed in Rio. Beach is insane. Then a third, we took everything we wanted from you. Now you're broke. Who needs a poor mother? A yellow smiley wearing sunglasses, like a mosquito with good public relations. I looked at the letter. I looked at the box. I looked at the garden, the sky, the house that Tom had painted the color of fresh cream because he said a bright home makes for bright breakfasts. Who needs a poor mother? I said aloud, tasting the sentence the way a chef tastes a sauce to see if it needs salt. Then I smiled the kind of smile that makes bank managers develop hives. I put everything back in the box, resealed the oilcloth, tucked the letter into my shirt like a second set of ribs, and carried the weight of new possibilities into the house. I washed my hands until the water ran clear, made tea, and read Tom's letter again from the start, every word a door, every door opening onto a hallway full of other doors. He confessed the taxi. The nest. The bag. I could not tell you, he wrote, because if I told you I would have to tell you how scared I was of the men, yes, but more of the way money changes the air in a room. I wanted time to pass until it could be ours without shadows. I wanted you safe more than I wanted to be clean. There was a line at the bottom I almost missed because my tears did that soft stupid thing they do when they finally stop pretending. No one was supposed to notice that we had gotten rich, he'd written. If I had brought the money and we had bought a new house, changed cars, they would have suspected that I had stolen it. I did everything to avoid suspicion and not put you in danger. The kettle clicked off again. I hadn't remembered turning it back on. Outside, the day had the decency to turn toward evening so the sky could practice being dramatic. I folded the letter along its old crease and pressed my palm to the words as if warmth could enter paper from skin or exit paper into resolve. So. My daughter had declared me not her mother. My son-in-law had declared cash a better heir than character. A bank had addressed me as patient in absentia. Meanwhile, under my garden, my dead husband had been keeping a secret that was either salvation or a new kind of storm. I set the box on the dining table, took a deep breath, and did what I do best, made a list. Item 1. Call the bank's fraud department again but climb the ladder this time, rung by careful rung, until someone heard me say the word forgery with the conviction of a woman who has nothing left to lose. Item 2. Photograph every page, every bond, every serial number. Item 3. Find an attorney with a spine like rebar. Item 4. Do not tell Ginny, much as I love her pie, she believes news is best when shared like cobbler. Ava sent one more message, this one a video of dancers at a club, light turning their faces into strange planets. I watched it until the frame froze on my daughter's mouth. Half smile. Half sneer. Entirely hers. Then I put my phone face down and looked at the box the way a general looks at a map. People think revenge is loud. They're wrong. Revenge is the quiet click of a pen before you sign your new name. I reached for Tom's letter again, page 2, where the numbers started to multiply into a promise, and turned it over. In the corner, he had written, almost sheepish, the total might surprise you. You'll know when you finish counting. I hadn't finished. Not yet. I picked up the first stack again, the edges crisp and sensible, and that's when the doorbell rang, 3 quick, cheerful stabs, the rhythm of a person who expects goodwill wherever they go. I looked at the box. I looked at the door. I wiped my hands on a dish towel because some habits are older than treasure, and walked to the entryway, shoulders squared, the letter warm against my heart. When I opened the door, I did not see a neighbor with borrowed sugar. I saw a man in a navy suit, a badge blinking like a small sun near his chest, and behind him, another man, plain clothes, watching my eyes the way cats watch moths. Miss Benson, the first one asked pleasantly. We're here about some unusual activity connected to your family. It'll only take a few minutes. I smiled, the kind of smile that means welcome and also good luck. Of course, I said, stepping aside while the clock in the hallway ticked like a metronome for destiny. Why don't you come in? I let the badges cross my threshold like I was welcoming Jehovah's Witnesses who'd brought their own coffee. The taller one introduced himself as Special Agent Laramie, nice western ring to it. I pictured him riding a filing cabinet into the sunset. The other, plain clothes with a tie that looked like it wanted to retire, went by Mr. Cole. They flashed credentials too quickly for my liking. I smiled as if I hadn't noticed. We're following up on a bank matter, Laramie said. Medical lending, potential identity theft. We're canvassing relatives. Relatives. Now there's a word that can mean party or crime scene. Canvass away, I said, easing them into the living room where the couch pretends not to have opinions. I placed them where Tom would have put a chest of drawers, back to the window, light in the eyes, just enough glare to make a liar blink. Tea? Coffee? Alibi? Cole almost smiled. Tea's fine. I boiled water like a patriot. While the kettle warmed up, I set my phone face down on the coffee table, screen recording already rolling. Old women knit. Smart women knit, record, and label. They asked about my daughter. Ava? I said lightly. She's on vacation. Brazil. Sand the exact color of compromised ethics. Laramie wrote that down without enjoying it. You suspect her of something? I added, innocent as a cat near cream. We're trying to understand a timeline, he said. A loan was authorized with your medical records. Which medical records? I asked. The stack that says I'm fine, or the imaginary one that says I needed $200,000 to remove an affliction known as motherhood? Cole shifted in his chair, which squeaked like an accomplice. Did you sign anything? Not unless I developed a second personality with sloppy penmanship. I handed over the folder from the bank, copies I'd made this morning with the zeal of a bureaucrat in spring. I'd appreciate your office confirming an investigation number before we proceed, I added, because no offense, gentlemen, but I have a complicated relationship with people who knock and claim to be from institutions. Laramie blinked. Then he pulled a card from his wallet, set it on the table, and dialed the number himself on speaker. A receptionist with a voice like bubble wrap confirmed his name, his unit, and an internal case code. He looked at me, small nod. I nodded back. We were now two people on a boat made of paperwork, trying not to rock. We discussed the loan. I supplied dates, call logs, names. I described the digital signature that looked like my autograph after arm wrestling a ghost. I did not, you understand, mention the box on my dining table humming with the frequency of moral complication. There are things you wear in public and things you keep under your coat. I am a woman who knows her wardrobe. Any medical diagnosis in the last year? Cole asked. None, but the chronic tendency to feed people who don't deserve my recipes. They took notes. They asked for permission to pull my credit report. Take it, I said. It's slimmer than a debutante. They wanted to know about Ava's husband, Damon. He smiles like a billboard for car leases, I replied. He sells entrepreneur like it comes with a warranty. Laramie stood, pocketed his notebook. We'll be in touch. Soon, I hope. I like my justice before it wilts. At the door, Cole paused. You should take steps to secure your finances. New passwords. Freeze your credit. Tell your bank. I freeze better than leftovers, I said, then shut the door and locked it with the satisfaction of a drawbridge rising. Back at the dining table, the box waited like a promise under oath. I closed the curtains. I counted. I organized. I made piles that tasted like power, cash, bonds, cashier's checks. I photographed everything. I logged serial numbers. I stored files on a drive that lives in a book hollowed out by Tom years ago when we thought our biggest secret would be the extra chocolate in the pantry. After 2 hours, I had a figure that made my breath go in and out on purpose, 3 million, give or take the cost of a gym membership and a strong cup of coffee. I laughed, not loud, just that private sound a woman makes when she realizes the universe owes her change and finally sends it. You were right, Tom, I whispered to the house. You were wrong to leave me the key to nothing. But you were right to wait. And then I did the thing any woman who has been underestimated learns to do on instinct. I made it look like nothing had happened. Half the cash went into vacuum-sealed packets inside a Tupperware labeled liver casserole and buried at the back of my chest freezer beneath 3 bags of peas. Let me tell you something, nobody steals old lady liver. The bonds and checks slid into a manila envelope tucked behind the false panel Tom had built under the basement stairs, a panel he'd commissioned during a phase when he admired survivalists but preferred indoor plumbing. The remaining cash fit into my purse, enough to pay a lawyer's retainer without dignifying Damon's God with a nervous prayer. Then I changed my passwords, froze my credit, and called the bank's fraud department again. This time, I asked for supervisors until I reached a woman named Bertha who spoke in periods. I used words like forgery, identity theft, and a criminal complaint, and when she tried to soothe me, I reminded her that soothing was for babies and lawsuits were for adults. She gave me a case number. I printed it and taped it inside a kitchen cabinet next to the cinnamon. Next, I called an attorney. Not one of those billboard nighthawks with slogans about pain. I called a woman I met at my widow's group, a tax attorney with eyes that could read your grocery list through your purse. Come tomorrow, she said. Bring everything. By then, the sun was stumbling down the sky and my phone had begun its evening exercise routine, messages from Ava. Photos of beaches, drinks with fruit hats, a nighttime skyline that couldn't decide whether it was a city or a jealousy campaign. Mom, you should have come, she wrote. I stared at the words until they rearranged themselves into a confession. We took. You paid. Warmest regards from your former child. I typed back, keep receipts. Then I put the phone away because I am not a woman who performs grief in group chats. Sleep came like a cat, when it wanted, where it wanted, and never for the amount you hope. I woke at 3 to the special darkness that lives between mistakes. I padded to the kitchen, poured water, read Tom's letter again by the oven light. He'd written about the stork's nest in that practical way of his, no adjectives, just the mechanics of a heist that wasn't his and became his because life sometimes hands you a moral math problem with no correct answers. Wait a few years, he'd said. Let it cool. Let them forget. Them. The men who had stashed the bag. Criminals who plant things often return to harvest. My scalp prickled like a field of dandelions. I made another list, motion sensor lights, doorbell camera, the kind of lock that makes burglars sigh. Also, a safe deposit box, but in a branch far from any bank that had ever sneezed my name. Morning delivered an America-shaped sunrise and a text from Bertha, police report filed. Expect contact. And from Agent Laramie, we'll need a statement under oath within the week. From Ava? A video of samba, hips and teeth and laughter. We're renewing our vows on the beach. She wrote, as if vows were coupons. Let me tell you something I learned as a girl in Ohio and perfected as a widow in New York. When people tell you who they are, you don't correct their grammar, you restructure your estate. I dressed in the armor women were to wage administrative war, good blouse, sensible shoes, lipstick the color of a decision, and drove to the attorney's office. Her name was Miriam. Her handshake said she'd sued harder people than my daughter before lunch. I told her everything but the stork's nest. I told her about the loan, the faked records, the vacation in my name. I handed over the bank folder, the call logs, the screenshots, the printed text messages, including who needs a poor mother, bordered in the kind of font that promised karma would take its time. Miriam looked up, eyebrows drawing together like a zipper. We'll initiate a fraud challenge, notify the credit bureaus, and send a preservation letter to the bank. Also, a cease and desist to your daughter and son-in-law. Make it heavy, I said. I want to hear the thud in Brazil. She almost smiled. You're calm. I'm busy, I corrected. On my way home, I stopped at a strip mall with a nail salon and a small, unfashionable bank with carpet older than my marriage. I opened a safe deposit box under a new trust, named so dull it could lull a toddler, Cream Street Irrevocable. I placed bonds inside. Not all. Not enough to make my hands shake when I closed the door. Just enough to start looking like a future. Then I bought motion sensor lights. Installed them myself because YouTube turns grandmothers into electricians with decent lighting. I ordered a doorbell camera. I set up a feed that pings my phone when a squirrel sneezes within 10 yards of my porch. Paranoia is just proactive safety in a better outfit. By late afternoon, I had one more stop, the pool. The rec center still smelled like middle school ambition and chlorine. I signed up for a lap membership. You a swimmer? The young man at the desk asked. Starting today, I said. New lungs, new legs, new rhythms. Water washes things no vacuum can find. When I got home, a package awaited on the doormat, plain brown, no return address. Not unusual in a world where your blender replacement part arrives looking like a bomb. I carried it to the table, slit the tape with a butter knife, and looked inside. Not a blender part. A single photograph. Glossy. Fresh. My backyard yesterday afternoon, the dirt circle where the clodhopper had stood, the wound in the earth exactly as I'd left it the first time I carried the box inside. In the corner of the photo, a single white feather. Taped to the back, a note in block letters that were trying too hard to be calm. Nice nest. My mouth went dry enough to qualify as sandpaper. I turned the photo over, half expecting coordinates, a ransom amount, the punchline to a joke I didn't enjoy. Nothing. Just that feather with a smell like old weather. I checked the new camera feed. No recording of the delivery. Whoever left it understood doorbells better than my generation understands emojis. I carried the photo to the sink, washed my hands for no good reason, then set it under the magnet shaped like a tomato on my fridge as if it were a school art project I hadn't asked for. The house felt smaller by 1 inch in all directions. I breathed slowly. Counted in. Counted out. Opened Tom's letter again and let my anger turn into something usable. You wanted us safe, Tom, I said to the paper. You wanted time. Time, I realized, had just run out. I picked up my phone, scrolled past Ava's latest palm tree, and dialed Agent Laramie. When he answered, I told him about the package in a voice that suggested I was watering begonias. He said, we're on our way. Take your time, I said, and hung up, because now the clock in my hallway wasn't counting, it was loading. I went to the freezer, moved the peas, and touched the Tupperware labeled liver casserole. Cold reassurance. Then I turned off the stove, turned on the porch light, and straightened my shoulders. If someone wanted to talk about nests, I was ready to discuss storks. Agent Laramie and Mr. Cole arrived just as the sun dipped low enough to cast my house in dramatic shadows. Perfect lighting for an interrogation. They walked in like men who wanted to make a living, not a scene. Still, I caught Cole's eyes dart toward the photo pinned under my tomato magnet. You should have called us sooner, Laramie said, tugging gloves onto his long hands. He slid the photograph into an evidence sleeve as though it might spit. I didn't call a priest for last rites either, I said, but thank you for your concern. Cole gave me a look, half respect, half exhaustion. This wasn't sent by amateurs. No kidding, I replied. Amateurs leave their return address. They asked the usual questions. Had I noticed anyone following me? Did I recognize the feather? Had I seen suspicious vehicles? Well, I said, my daughter has been driving me crazy for 30 years, does that count as suspicious? Cole tried not to smirk. Laramie didn't bother. I poured them tea in chipped mugs Tom once called antique, they were not, unless Kmart now counts as ancient history. While they sipped, I studied them the way I studied produce at the market, looking for bruises, soft spots. Laramie's shoes were polished, but the sole edges frayed. Cole's pen had chew marks. These were men too busy chasing trouble to recognize the trouble sitting across from them had already started running drills. Ms. Benson, Laramie said finally, this looks like a warning. Whoever buried that box didn't want it found. Oh, really? I said sweetly. And here I thought it was a welcome basket. He ignored the jab. If they're back in circulation, it means they're checking loose ends. They might know you have the contents. Might? I asked. Or do? We can't be sure yet. I set my mug down. Gentlemen, uncertainty is for meteorologists. You tell me, should I be sleeping with a gun under my pillow? Cole leaned forward. Do you own a firearm? Not yet, I said. They exchanged one of those law enforcement looks that holds a 5-minute meeting in 2 seconds. Then Laramie stood. We'll increase patrols. If you see anyone near your property, call immediately. Darlin', if I see anyone near my property, you'll hear about it before I hang up. When they left, the silence they carried out with them stayed behind. The photo, gone from the fridge, had left an outline under the tomato magnet, a pale square of safety that no longer existed. That night, I didn't sleep. I counted instead. Not cash this time, steps. 1 from bed to window. 3 from window to dresser. 6 from dresser to the box hidden in the basement. 8 from box back to bed. Over and over until dawn stretched in like a nosy neighbor. By breakfast, I had a plan. First step, go public without going public. I joined the local historical society that morning. $50 and a handshake got me a seat at their table and access to every nosy retiree in the county. Old ladies talk more than social media and archive better than the FBI. By lunch, they had already asked why Ava hadn't visited me in months. By dinner, I'd learned that Ava and Damon had posted every cocktail, every bikini shot, every boat ride on Instagram like pigeons leaving droppings. Second step, look harmless. I wore floral prints. I carried cookies to the quilting circle. I bought 2 extra tomato plants at the nursery, made a point of asking the clerk if Miracle-Gro works better than Epsom salt. Nobody suspects the woman in orthopedic sandals. Third step, test the waters. I deposited a small stack of Tom's bonds into the Cream Street Trust account, just enough to pay off the fraudulent loan on paper. I wanted to see who twitched. And twitch they did. 3 days later, I got a voicemail from Ava. Her voice trembled, not with guilt, but calculation. Mom. I heard you paid the loan? That's amazing. Maybe we could talk? Damon and I, well, maybe we rushed things. Families fight, right? Maybe we can. I stopped the recording. Played it again, slower, just to savor the gall. Families fight. Families fight, and daughters steal your name to fund honeymoons. Families fight, and then they crawl back when they sniff money on your breath. Maybe we can, I whispered to the empty kitchen. Maybe we can, my dear Ava. But not the way you think. The next morning, the game escalated. I woke to find my garden gate open, though I had latched it myself. Footprints in the soil of boots, not sneakers. And the clodhopper plant, the one I had dug around when I found Tom's box, was uprooted, lying on its side like a body. Whoever it was hadn't found the box. But they were looking. Instead of panic, I felt a sharp thrill. If they wanted to dig, let them dig. A woman who has lived 6 decades knows how to bait a trap. I replanted the clodhopper with exaggerated care, but beneath it, instead of treasure, I buried a shoebox filled with Avon catalogs, expired coupons, and one note in red ink. Wrong nest. Try harder. By afternoon, I'd bought myself a gun. Not a loud, macho cannon. A quiet revolver, second-hand but polished, the kind of weapon that looks like it would sit comfortably in a lady's handbag. I practiced in the woods with earplugs and determination until my hands stopped shaking. Then I did something very brave, or very stupid. I invited Ava and Damon over. "Oh, Mom," Ava said on the phone, her voice dripping sugar. "We'd love to. We've missed you." "Sunday dinner," I told her. "Bring wine. Not cheap." When I hung up, I smiled the smile Tom once said meant I was either about to bake a pie or start a revolution. This time, it wasn't pie. Because by Sunday, I would know exactly how far my daughter was willing to crawl back, and exactly how I was going to make her choke on it. I set the table like a woman who's been to enough funerals to know how people behave when the music stops, napkins folded, wine chilled, the good plates out of hibernation. There's an art to making your life look ordinary when you mean to rearrange other people's. I put out the casserole dish Tom liked because it makes people think you're thinking about dinner and not destiny. Ava and Damon arrived exactly on time, which is to say they arrived when they wanted to be seen arriving. Ava wore a dress that did not belong to anyone who owes a cent. Damon wore a grin laminated by Instagram. They brought a bottle of wine, the good kind that has a pronounceable vineyard and a sequel on the label. They walked through my gate like kings into a small, unimposing kingdom that had once been theirs for the asking. "Lucy," Ava said, the nickname crisp and casual. She stepped in as if the house owed her warmth. "It smells amazing in here. Are those your tomatoes?" "Yes," I said, and meant it. "They're proud citizens of my garden." We ate. I fed them food I'd learned to make when meals had meaning and not maneuvering. I let them talk as if the conversation were a tennis match and they had the better racket. Damon told a story about a project that would definitely take off if only someone invested in his charisma. Ava laughed on cue. I listened like I was taking notes. After the second course, a roast I'd slow-cooked until the meat remembered how to be tender, I reached for my wine and, with one hand steady as the law, I hit the speaker with a preloaded playlist. It wasn't songs. It was a little recorder I had, old technology, new use, feeding the room the sound of my daughter's voice. "Mom, you should have come. We took everything we wanted from you. Now you're broke. Who needs a poor mother?" Ava went still as if someone had turned off the color. Damon's fork clattered like a dropped drumstick. "You recorded me," she hissed. "You recorded yourself," I said. "And you sent it to me. Twice." "You have no right to," Damon started, the lawyer-shaped part of him waking like a man who's just noticed fleas. But being a man with a mortgage and a debit card optimism is not the same as being a man with criminal immunity. I slid the bank photo across the table. The handwriting, the forged digital signature, the printouts from the lender. "This is not a misunderstanding," I said. "This is identity theft by a close family member." Ava's face was a study in panic and poise, doing a terrible waltz together. "Mom, listen," she tried. "You're going to need a better verb than listen if you hope to rewrite this," I said. "We have an agent involved. We have fingerprints, they took the photo on my porch, Agent Laramie has it, and we have a lawyer. I paid the loan on paper this week because I wanted to see who would twitch." "You twitched. You called. You offered to talk." She swallowed. Damon leaned in and said, "Lucy, this could all be a big mistake. Maybe someone used our card. We've had identity theft before." "Not in my name for a vacation to Brazil," I said. "Not when you posted sunburn lines like trophies." That made Ava's mouth do the little clench people use to hide their teeth. She tried the old trope, blame the algorithm, blame the bank, but my attorney, Miriam, had taught me that when people start pointing at instruments, they're preparing their alibis. Here's the thing, I said, soft as butter but sharp as a paring knife. I could press criminal charges. I could turn every document I've got over to the DA and watch this become the sort of story the evening news stamps with the word shocking. Agents would interview neighbors, your employer, passengers on flights. Your honeymoon photos would be used as evidence because, apparently, you purchased them with my name and my credit. Damon's jaw tightened. Ava's eyes went to the window like she was searching for a route that didn't include a future in my orbit. But I'm not a vindictive woman, I continued. Tom would have hated a scandal. He wanted safety. He wanted time. I want something else. They looked like two people who suddenly realized that the buffet didn't include a free pass. What do you want? Damon asked, as if bargaining were a currency he'd been trained to spend. Choice, I said. And spectacle. I had Miriam's legal advice simmering in the back of my head like a stalk. She'd said, very helpfully, that the two best levers you can pull when someone has wronged you are law and laughter. The law can incarcerate, laughter reshapes reputations. First option, I said, and I let the candor settle. You do the right thing publicly. You come before the Historical Society, where all your friends' grandparents' friends will be, and apologize. You sign a notarized confession that you applied for a loan using my identity, and you accept responsibility for repaying every cent you spent. You make restitution on record. We go to a mediator. We sign agreements. We avoid a criminal record if you behave like adults. Ava's shoulders rose in a single, annoyed motion. That's humiliating. Fine. I blinked once, the way you blink at a sunset and keep your dignity. Option 2, I give everything I have to my lawyer. I press charges. I hand Agent Laramie the bank records, the photos, the messages. You will become aliases in police interviews and cautionary tales at weekend brunches. There will be subpoenas. Your employer may not appreciate the headlines. Damon's face turned a hue I'd seen before, when a man discovers his golf club is a garden implement. He tried to be reasonable. There must be another way. We can negotiate. We can. Or, I said, leaning back because I wanted them to see I was comfortable in my skin, there's a third thing I'm proposing. I intend to buy a small cheese factory outside of town, the old Walton place. I will make it into the cheese operation I always dreamed about, artisanal, local, the sort of business people write patronizing columns about and then buy into because nostalgia is marketable. I can get you jobs there. Work pays restitution. You'll repay me in labor and dignity rather than proceedings and ledgers. Ava laughed, thin and fast. You want to employ us? Yes, I said. You will wear uniforms. You will learn to milk goats, if the Walton place reopens its herd. You will read labels aloud in front of a camera for our social channels. I, Ava Turner, misused my mother's identity. You will do community service. You will be public. You will repay what you owe in a currency of my choosing. This last drew a sound out of Ava like a small, surprised animal. Damon went white around the edges. You can't make us. I can make my life very comfortable and your return to my family conditional, I said. I can sign a release that spares criminal charges in exchange for restitution, public apology, and community labor. If you refuse, you won't get that release. You'll get the DA. The table held its breath, the room smelled faintly of time and fear. Ava started to cry then, not the quiet sorrow I'd seen in previous years, but the theatrical kind people practice in movies. Mom, please. This was supposed to be temporary. We said we'd pay you back. We thought. You thought you could decorate your life with my name and I'd applaud, I said. You thought I'd be a prop. You thought wrong. She dug in her bag and produced an envelope, the kind with vacation receipts and glitter. We have proof of expenses, she said, thrusting it like a talisman. We spent it on a honeymoon. On experiences for our marriage. I picked up the envelope and scanned a few receipts with the same calm I've used to scan medical bills. They were what they seemed: hotel, excursions, cocktails with names you need a PhD to pronounce. You borrowed my name for that, I said. You used my identity. That's theft. Ava's voice sharpened. You raised me to be practical, she said, as if practicality justified theft. You taught me how to use a coupon and how to ask for favors. This was. It was theft, I said. And you owe me. Somewhere outside, a siren practiced its wail in the distance like an off-key singer. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe fate has a horn. Damon's eyes went to my face, to the box I'd left conspicuously on the sideboard where everyone could see it, Tom's box, still closed, the thing that had turned my life upside down and right side up in the space of an afternoon. He swallowed. If you go public, he said, this will ruin everything. My dear, I said, and the temptation to be cruel crossed my mouth like dessert. I already buried my reputation once when Tom died. I don't intend to bury it again for a pair of people who mistake my existence for an ATM. Ava stood abruptly, the chair scraping like discontent. She stopped as if someone had clamped her tongue. You'll be sorry, she managed, then stormed for the door. Damon followed, face thunderous, dignity trailing behind like dead leaves. At the gate, Ava paused, turned, and shot me a look that was all threat and no poetry. You'll pay for this, she said. You'll regret it. You're making the biggest mistake of your life. Maybe, I said, smiling the polite smile of someone who has eaten lemons and liked them. Or maybe I'm making the best investment. They left, leaving a storm of perfume and the faint echo of a laugh that sounded like a departure. I closed the door and flipped the camera feed on. The recorder had captured it all, every stab of conversation, every threat, every tremor. I uploaded the crucial clips to Miriam, labeled them, and watched as her little red on the messaging app turned from idle to typing. When she called me back, she sounded like a woman someone should have chosen as a counselor for kings. You did well, she said. You offered them a way out. You recorded confession. If they refuse, I'll draft everything for the DA. They'll have no wiggle room. Good, I said. Make sure the release terms are generous enough to sound like mercy but strict enough to sting. She laughed, one of those short laughs that says she's impressed. Consider it done. I went to the basement and opened the box. Tom's letter had another line I'd been saving like a splinter under a fingernail. There are names, he'd written, almost in passing. People who knew where the money came from. Not many. But a list. I kept thinking about that feather in the photograph, and the note taped to it that said nice nest. Whoever had tried to scare me knew something. Maybe they wanted the bag back. Maybe they wanted a quiet cell. Maybe they wanted a woman who dug up treasure to stop. I had no idea. But I did have an advantage. My enemies assumed I would stay poor and small. I had 3 million reasons not to be either. That night, I slept like a woman who had opened a new ledger. Hearts had balances, and mine had a sum that finally made sense. I dreamed of a barn with stainless steel vats, of cheese wheels stacked like small, smug planets. I dreamed of Ava sweeping floors with a sign that read, I'm learning honesty. The dream was petty, perhaps. It was also delicious. When morning came, there was a message on my phone from an unknown number, a text that read only, beware the nest you did not make. I put the phone down, poured my tea, and listened to the house breathe. I have been called many things in my life. Indestructible is not one of them. Cunning is, however. And now that the nest had been disturbed, I intended to learn who had made it, and why. The text message, beware the nest you did not make, sat on my phone like a snake in the grass. I reread it 3 times, waiting for the words to turn into something ordinary, like a telemarketer scam or a misfired chain text. But no, it had that smell of menace. The kind of sentence that thinks it's clever because it rhymes in your head. I didn't reply. I never reply to riddles unless I've already written the answer. Instead, I set the phone on the counter and went to the garden. I've found that dirt calms me better than pills. My hands in soil remind me of who I am, a woman who grows things, not a woman who waits for them to be stolen. As I knelt by the clodhopper, my decoy shoebox buried beneath Avon catalogs and all, I thought about Tom's letter. He'd mentioned names, in passing, like a man leaving breadcrumbs, not because he wanted me to find the trail but because he couldn't stop himself from being honest at the last moment. That afternoon, I reread the letter again, this time slower, looking for cracks. There it was, on the third page, half hidden between descriptions of the taxi ride and his panic. I overheard one of them call the other Rico. The driver called them the brothers. No idea if that was literal. They said drop it in the nest, come back in a week, lay low. That's all. If you find this, Lou, remember, it's not just money. It's someone's unfinished story. Rico, I whispered into the kitchen light. The name tasted like cheap rum and bad intentions. I called Miriam. She listened, clicking her pen in the background. If that money is tied to an old crime, she said, then whoever it belonged to will eventually try to reclaim it, or silence you. I figured that out when they sent me feathers. You need protection, Lucy. I have a revolver, a doorbell camera, and $3 million. I'll be fine. Miriam exhaled like a woman used to stubborn clients. Fine isn't the same as safe. Don't underestimate men who lose money. They'll come for it like dogs come for a bone. Stay watchful. I've been watchful since the day Ava stole my name. Don't worry, I'm good at turning danger into homework. That weekend, I set the trap. The Historical Society had invited me to speak about Tom, his service, his volunteer work, his gardening tips. I accepted, because widows with casseroles are considered wholesome. But I also knew gossip spreads there faster than butter on a hot biscuit. So when I stood in front of that crowd, I did something wickedly strategic. I told them I was opening a cheese factory. I talked about Tom's dream, how he'd always wanted us to invest in the county's dairy, how I was finally making it happen. I didn't mention the box or the bonds. I didn't need to. The words factory, investment, and business are enough to travel through a town like smoke through curtains. Sure enough, by Tuesday, Ava called. Mom, I heard you bought the Walton place. I stirred my tea. Word travels. That's incredible, she said, her voice coated in honey that came from a jar labeled desperation. Damon and I were talking, maybe we could help? You know, with promotion, with marketing? We're good at social media. I saw your beach photos, I said. Yes, you're good at something. Mom, please. We're family. We messed up, I admit it. But we can work it out. We can. You'll get your chance, I said, and hung up. 2 nights later, the next move came from the other side. I was locking up after dark when I noticed movement near the garden. Not a raccoon. Too tall. I flicked the floodlight on, revolver in hand, and caught the outline of a man slipping past the fence. He froze in the glare, face masked, boots muddy. Then he ran. Not toward the road, toward the woods behind my house. I didn't chase him. That's what young fools do in movies before they become memorialized. Instead, I walked to the garden, checked the clodhopper, and smiled. The decoy shoebox was gone. So, they'd taken the bait. I went back inside, poured myself a glass of that overpriced wine Ava had brought, and toasted the night. Enjoy the coupons, Rico. The following morning, a black SUV idled across the street. Not subtle. 2 men inside, pretending to check their phones. I made a point of walking to my mailbox in my bathrobe, waving like a neighbor, and slipping a bright pink sticky note on their windshield. Next time, smile for the camera. My doorbell app had already snapped their plates. I sent the photos to Laramie with a cheerful note, your friends from the nest are restless. Thought you should know. His reply came fast, stay put. We're tracking them. Do not engage. Too late for that, I thought. Engagement had already begun. By midsummer, the Walton place was mine. The papers signed, the old dairy barn standing proud again under a sky that smelled like rain and money. I hired local contractors, not just to rebuild but to gossip. Nothing makes men talk like paint and plaster. Within a week, the county knew Lucy Benson was back in business. Ava showed up one morning with Damon in tow, carrying coffee like bribes. We want to help, she said. I looked at their perfect faces, their curated charm. Oh, we'll help, I said, smiling like a cat. You'll mop floors, haul crates, and stamp labels. And you'll do it until every penny is paid. Community service, courtesy of motherhood. Damon started to argue, but Ava stopped him. Her eyes told me she knew I meant it. I let them think they'd wormed their way back into my life. Let them wear their aprons and pretend they were part of the dream. What they didn't know was that every shift they worked was documented, every paycheck docked, every confession notarized. Miriam was turning the screws with precision. And as for the men watching from the SUV? I had plans for them too. Because Tom's letter had ended with one more line I hadn't shared yet, not even with Miriam. If they ever come for it, Lou, tell them this, I took their money, but I left their names. They can have one back, but not both. I didn't yet know what that meant. But I intended to find out. And when I did, I'd make sure Ava and Damon were standing right there to see what real danger looks like, and how their mother handles it without flinching. By the time the SUV men made their move, Ava and Damon had already been working at the cheese plant for 3 weeks. And when I say working, I mean sweating like televangelists in hell. I had them mopping floors, stacking crates, labeling jars. Damon's manicure didn't survive the first Tuesday. Ava complained about her back, her hair, her dignity. I told her dignity was on aisle 3 next to the bleach. The town loved it. Nothing travels faster in a small county than the sight of 2 spoiled children in hairnets. The Historical Society practically sold tickets. People stopped by to support the factory, but I knew the truth, they came for the gossip buffet. And I fed them with a smile. But the wolves were circling. It was a Thursday evening when the knock came. Not polite. 3 hard raps, like someone testing the wood for hollowness. I opened the door with my revolver tucked in the pocket of my apron. 2 men stood there. One tall, one built like a refrigerator left out in the rain. Black jackets, clean shoes. Eyes that said they'd rather be anywhere but were determined to finish their errand. Ms. Benson, the tall one said. His voice was smooth, rehearsed. We'd like to discuss something you found in your garden. I smiled the kind of smile that looks like a welcome mat but hides a trapdoor. You'll have to be more specific. I've found weeds, rabbits, and the occasional rusty nail. Funny, the fridge-shaped one said. But we're not here for comedy. I gestured toward the porch chairs. Then you'll have to sit. My comedy plays best with an audience. They exchanged a glance but sat. That was their first mistake. Sitting on my porch meant stepping onto my stage. Years ago, Tall said, a package went missing. Belongs to some people who are still asking questions. We know your late husband took it. We know you found it. We're here to collect. Oh, I said, tilting my head. You must mean the shoebox of Avon catalogs. I hope you enjoyed the discounts. Fridge snarled. Don't play games, lady. I never play games I can't win, I said, leaning back. And right now, you're on my property, admitting knowledge of a crime. You want to threaten me? Smile, you're already on camera. I tapped my phone, showing them the doorbell feed live streaming our little porch soiree. Their faces drained, just enough for me to know I'd scored. Tall cleared his throat. You don't understand. That money wasn't just money. It belonged to people who don't forgive theft. You're in danger. I laughed. Not hysterically, more like a woman who's been waiting for someone to confirm her suspicions. Gentlemen, I've been in danger since the day my daughter was born with Damon on speed dial. You don't scare me. But I am curious, tell me, what's your name? Rico? The fridge man twitched. Just slightly. Enough. Thought so, I said. Tom mentioned you in his letter. Funny, isn't it, how the dead talk more honestly than the living? Now they were rattled. I pressed harder. Tom didn't leave me money. He left me leverage. Names. Dates. Enough to make sure if anyone came sniffing around, they'd be the ones answering questions. I wonder what Agent Laramie would do with that little package of information. Their silence was worth more than the cash in my freezer. Finally, Tall stood. We'll be back. Think carefully, Ms. Benson. Some things aren't worth holding on to. Neither is cowardice, I replied, and shut the door in their faces. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with Tom's letter spread before me like a deck of cards. I took their money, but I left their names. They can have one back, but not both. It clicked then. Tom hadn't just taken the bag. He'd taken information, proof of who these men were tied to. Probably incriminating enough to bury them if it ever got out. I rummaged through the box again, and sure enough, under the last layer of bonds, taped to the underside like a stowaway, was another envelope. Inside, a crumpled receipt, names scribbled in Tom's blocky hand. Rico and Sal. Drop at Marsh. Split with Martel. Don't screw this up. Martel. That was a name heavy enough to sink a boat. The next morning, I went to the cheese plant and pulled Ava into my office. Damon hovered like a mosquito, but I shut the door in his face. You said you wanted to help, I told her. Yes, she said carefully. We do. Good. Because helping means more than mopping floors. It means you're going to take a trip. Her eyes narrowed. What kind of trip? The kind where you deliver a message. To Rico and his friends. You'll tell them I'm willing to trade. They want the money? Fine. But I want safety. I want their word, in writing, that they'll never come near me, or you, again. She stared at me like I'd grown horns. Mom, that's insane. They're criminals. They'll kill me. Maybe, I said. Or maybe they'll realize the only thing worse than killing you is leaving me alive with their names. Because if anything happens to you, Ava, I'll hand this list to the FBI wrapped in a bow. And then Rico, Sal, and Martel will spend their lives explaining themselves to people who don't care about feathers or nests. She went pale. Why me? Because, I said, leaning forward, you stole from me. You made me into a victim. Now you get to learn what it feels like to stand in my shoes. Think of it as restitution, with interest. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Finally, she whispered, Damon won't let me. Damon won't have a choice, I said. Because if he loves his freedom half as much as he loves himself, he'll know this is the only deal on the table. That night, I wrote the note Ava would deliver. You want the nest? Fine. You'll get half. But leave me and mine alone. Come after us, and the names go to the feds. You know what that means. Choose wisely. I sealed it, handed it to her the next morning. Damon fumed, but he didn't stop her. Fear has a way of teaching obedience. As she drove off, I watched from the porch, arms folded. For the first time since this mess began, Ava looked less like a thief and more like a terrified little girl. And part of me, tiny, reluctant, almost pitied her. Almost. Because pity doesn't erase betrayal. And this time, my daughter was going to learn that when you burn bridges, sometimes you're the one who has to swim through the river full of wolves. Ava left with the note in her trembling hand and Damon's knuckles white on the steering wheel. I watched the taillights until they disappeared over the hill, the way I used to watch her yellow school bus when she was little. Only this time, instead of multiplication tables in her backpack, she carried leverage with criminals who wouldn't hesitate to multiply her fear. I didn't follow. I didn't call. I didn't pace. I cleaned. You see, when the world is collapsing, a woman of my age knows to scrub counters and mop floors. If death comes knocking, I want my house tidy enough for judgment. By dusk, Ava called. Not Damon. Not the FBI. Ava. Mom, she whispered, her voice thin as a paper cut. I gave them the note. And? I asked, calm as a teapot. They laughed. Of course they did. Men laugh when they don't want to admit they're scared. They said, she faltered. They said if you really had their names, you'd already be dead. I smiled into the phone. Then they underestimated me. Again. Mom, they're dangerous. They. Before she could finish, I heard a scuffle in the background. A muffled shout. Tires squealing. Then the line went dead. Now, I'm no stranger to panic. I've buried a husband, survived widowhood, outlasted grief that chews like glass. But that sound, my daughter being pulled away into silence, lit something in me I hadn't felt since Tom's funeral, raw, unfiltered fury. I dialed Laramie. Straight to voicemail. Agent, my daughter's been grabbed. Rico and his friend. They've got her. Call me before I decide to handle this myself. Then I opened Tom's envelope again, studied the names. Rico. Sal. Martel. Scribbles of numbers beside them, phone digits? Codes? Tom hadn't been tidy, but he hadn't been sloppy either. I pulled up my laptop, ran the numbers through every search engine like a woman desperate for a recipe. One popped, an old warehouse lease under the name Salvatore Romano. Address, outskirts of town. I didn't call the police. Not yet. Because when someone steals your blood, you don't outsource the rescue. I drove my minivan like it was a getaway car, revolver in my purse, flashlight in the glove box. The warehouse stood hunched against the horizon, windows blacked out, graffiti scrawled like bad handwriting. I parked half a block away, crept in through a side door rusted enough to squeal but drowned out by voices inside. Men talking. Ava crying. Damon shouting something about mistakes. I peeked around the corner. There they were, Rico, Fridge, Sal, presumably, and a third man with slicked back hair and a suit that had seen better days. Martel. The kind of man who'd drown kittens for fun, then write it off as business expenses. Ava was tied to a chair, Damon beside her, wrists bound. Rico waved my note like a flag. This is bull. Old man Benson didn't keep names. He barely kept his breath. Martel leaned in close to Ava. If your mother has something, she'll come for you. If not, he let the sentence hang like a noose. That was my cue. I stepped out, revolver steady, voice louder than I'd planned. Congratulations, gentlemen, you guessed correctly. I came. All three spun. Ava gasped. Damon went white. Lucy, Martel said, lips curling. The widow herself. Yes, I said. And the widow has paperwork. Names, dates, receipts. Enough to make sure none of you buy so much as a bus ticket without the FBI shaking your shoelaces. Rico snarled. Liar. Check your windshield, I said. I've got copies in an envelope under the wiper of your SUV. If I don't walk out of here alive, that envelope gets delivered. By morning, Laramie will know everything. Martel's eyes narrowed. You bluffing, old woman? I don't bluff, I said. I bake. And with that, I tossed a Ziploc bag onto the floor. Inside? A stack of receipts, copies of Tom's note, a printout of the lease with Sal's name. Just enough to smell like truth. Martel crouched, flipped through. His jaw tightened. So the old man did leave something. Plenty, I said. And you can have the money. Half. The rest buys my safety. But if you touch my daughter again, if you so much as breathe near my garden, those names go public. Every last one. The silence afterward was sharp enough to slice bread. Finally, Martel chuckled. Low. Dangerous. But not dismissive. You've got guts, lady. He turned to Rico. Untie her. Rico hesitated, then obeyed. Ava stumbled free, rushing into my arms. Damon trailed, blinking like a man just waking from a bad dream. Deal, Martel said. Half. And we never see each other again. Done, I said, though in my bones I knew this wasn't the end. Back home, after Ava collapsed in tears on my couch and Damon poured himself half my whiskey, I locked myself in the kitchen and opened Tom's letter one more time. On the back page, in faint pencil I hadn't noticed before, was a final line. Lou, if you ever face them, remember, the money was never the treasure. The names were. I sat there, staring at the words, understanding too late what Tom had meant. The money could vanish. But the names, Martel, Rico, Sal, were leverage forever. And now, I held both. The question was, what would I do with them? When I folded Ava into my arms in that warehouse, something small and feral inside me decided it liked being alive. I'd spent so long shaping the polite face of a grieving woman that I forgot how fierce I could be when my own garden was threatened. That night, after the men slouched away with the half they'd negotiated and the taste of defeat already souring on their tongues, I lay awake and made the ledger of the rest of my life. Revenge, people assume, is one big dramatic explosion. In my experience, it's a series of tiny lights, careful, methodical, beautiful, and the darkness they push back is what counts. I had 3 million reasons to be strategic, and the first item on my list was clear: make the cheese factory real, and make it the kind of enterprise that anchors a town and stares at vultures like they're polite pigeons. I started with the Walton barn. Rehabbing it took money, patience, and a contractor who loved the idea of turning rust into renaissance. I insisted on local labor, folks who had been my neighbors since before my daughter learned to walk in platform heels. I hired Lydia from the diner, Arthur from the hardware store, and the Jennings twins who could weld anything from a gate to a marriage proposal. The county council liked the idea because jobs look shiny on grant applications. Miriam liked the idea because a legitimate business makes certain kinds of trouble harder to stitch into your life. Agent Laramie liked the idea because a visible public venture is a wonderful place to watch people who think they can come back for what they left behind. And watch they did. A few weeks after the warehouse incident, 2 men in a black SUV returned, not to threaten, but to test. They wanted to see whether I would still be alone and frightened, the kind of woman you can squeeze until she sings. I invited them in for coffee and a tour like any hostess with a plan. We walked the milk room where stainless steel vats hummed like contented whales. We passed the aging room where wheels of cheese rested like moons, wrapped in muslin and patience. I pointed out the signage, the labels, Benson's Reserve, Walton White, Tom's Cheddar, and let them breathe the scent of something made honest. We're here for a conversation, the tall one said, hands in pockets, posture still aggressive enough to suggest they hadn't yet decided whether they were criminals or clients. Martel, slick suit, gambler's jaw, smiled like a man used to betting with other people's luck. We want a return on what we recognize. I stopped by a large window that looked out on the field where the goats grazed. A kid butted its head against a post and trotted away like business as usual. You took more than you were owed, I said. You scared my family. You hurt my daughter. You don't get to come back and change the narrative because the scent of income is sweet. Martel leaned in. We just want what's fair. Fair? I looked at him for a long, considerate moment. Fair would be you paying for what you broke. That's why half the money you took went to someone who can't be bribed, the DA. The other half? You got it, but you also signed off on terms. No more nests, no more messages, a public non-prosecution agreement contingent on your silence and cooperation should questions arise. That's fair. His face, for the first time, registered the tiny white space where pride used to sit. He wasn't used to deals where he wasn't wearing both gloves, the kind that hide fingerprints and feelings. He accepted, because men like him always accept the easiest exits when offered shoes that fit. What I did next was the piece of theater I'd been planning since I first counted the money in my kitchen and felt my chest expand like a chorus line. I invited the whole county, historical society, the mayor, the newspaper, and Agent Laramie, to the Walton opening. I made a speech about Tom, about grief, about small towns and big second chances. I signed papers in front of everyone, restitution agreements, release forms for Ava and Damon, a formal employment contract that would have them on the payroll for wages docked toward the debt. I read passages from Tom's letter about the nest and the names, careful, measured, never accusatory in a way that would jeopardize the DA's case but crystal clear enough to show people who'd been paying attention that something uncomfortable had been hidden for too long. Ava stood beside me, wearing a company apron instead of a sundress, her hair braided the way farmhands wore it. Damon carried a crate of jars and tried to meet people's eyes. I watched the way their faces tightened when neighbors congratulated them in that particular manner people use when they know someone's moved from sin to labor. It was exquisite, justice that twinned with mercy. They were getting paid, and they were paying back. They were publicly accountable, they were no longer ghosts with good lighting. You might expect me to gloat. I didn't. Instead, I watched the eggshell of our family life crack and something useful crawl out. Ava had to learn. Damon had to be honest with himself. And I, for the first time since Tom's letter, let myself be the person who inherited not shame but choice. There was the matter of Rico and Sal and the loose ends they liked to chew. I handed copies of the names, which I'd corroborated, to Laramie. He had agents ready to make small appearances at busy intersections and barn raisings. One by one, those men became inconvenient to themselves, subpoenas, wiretap warrants, a careful, legal unmasking of a network that would not impress anyone with stately morality. Martel, for all his swagger, realized the future was thin. He left town with less swagger. Rico and Sal found that their nests had termites labeled federal interest. It was perfectly legal, perfectly clean, and quietly brutal in the way paperwork can be when it finally pries loose a criminal's smile. Money that used to be a weapon for them lost its teeth when the law learned it existed. Money that had been hidden in my garden found a new purpose. I paid off the fraudulent loan entirely. I set up scholarships in Tom's name for local kids heading to community college, because if I was going to take from the place that tried to take me, I wanted to give back to the people most needing a leg up. I invested in the Walton workforce, created apprenticeships for kids whose parents still believed in honest work, and gave a portion of my gains to the food bank, because nothing hollows the stomach faster than redemption without real bread. As for Ava and Damon, their restitution schedule was brutal in a way that favored growth over ruin. They worked. They learned. They made videos where Ava read the truth aloud and Damon explained what it felt like to be a man who took the easy route and stopped. The county, unforgiving and generous in equal measure, watched them scrub floors and learn to read labels without batting an eyelash. People forgave slowly. They forgave more when they saw sweat and remorse. And me? I learned something else: you can be wealthy and still be modest. You can own $3 million and decide most of it should do good instead of simply feeding pride. Tom had wanted time. I'd bought time and stretched it into something that had a heartbeat and a delivery route. I had the cheese factory, sure, but I also had afternoons at the pool and lessons in how to swim out of grief's current. I bought a small blue convertible, something absurd that made my neighbors laugh, and drove to the coast one morning just because I could. The sea, it turns out, is a generous listener. On the day the DA finally closed their file on the case, no fireworks, just a quiet one-page memo that said, in legalese, matters resolved. I took a walk through the Walton property. The aging room smelled of milk and patience. A wheel of Tom's cheddar sat on the rack, small and proud. I touched it and felt the weight of years and choices, both mine and his. I read Tom's letter one last time and folded it into the back of a drawer, where good things go when nothing dramatic needs to be done with them. The last time Ava tried to apologize for the way she had used my name, she brought me a jar of cheese she'd helped make. It was not perfect. It had a wrinkle in the rind and a personality like a teenager's diary, but it was honest. She said, "Mom, I'm sorry. I was selfish. I thought I could borrow your life like a favor." "You did," I said, taking the jar. "And you learned the cost." She put her hand over mine, that old nervous flicker she still sometimes shows when she's trying to be brave. "Can you forgive me?" I looked at her, at the woman who had once been both my child and my thief, and I thought of Tom's last advice, time. I thought of the way the town had rallied and scolded and stitched back what had been torn. I thought of the scholarship that would help a kid she'd never met go to college free of worry. "I can," I said slowly. "But forgive doesn't mean forget. We run a tight ledger here. You work, you learn, you pay. And every year on the anniversary of the day I dug that box up, I want you standing next to me, putting labels on the jars for the farmer's market. Not because I'm cruel, but because I want you to remember the smell of honest work." She nodded. It was small, but it was the beginning of something truer than her old shortcuts. That evening, after the shop closed and the vats settled into their steady breathing, I walked back into my garden. The clodhopper corner had been replanted. The ground was level, no more secrets. A robin hopped across the soil and looked at me like it knew everything and enjoyed nothing. I bent and planted a small herb rosemary for remembrance, and pressed the soil down with fingers that had known both grief and guile. Who needs a poor mother? I whispered at the earth, because the line still tasted wicked and right. Not anymore. Tom had left me a secret and a key. I had turned them into a life. The men who had wanted my fortune found that money can be a poor reward for a clean conscience. My daughter learned that names have weight, and my county learned that a woman in her 60s could be dangerous, but mostly, she could be brilliant. I kept most of my money quiet, invested in things that build towns rather than reputations. I bought the minivan a new engine and I kept a small stash labeled emergency, Ava, because mercy is still a useful tool when wielded with steel. I swam, I worked, I made cheese. People came to the Walton place not for scandal but for flavors that told a story of soil and stubbornness. At night, sometimes, when the vats hummed and the town had folded itself into sleep, I read Tom's letter and smiled. No one was supposed to notice we had gotten rich, he'd written, and maybe he was right, no one was supposed to notice. But the people who noticed were my kind of people. They knew how to turn surprise into sustenance. So I did what widows do best, I rebuilt. Not out of spite, but out of appetite. I built a life that fed me and fed others, and when someone raised a voice against me, I raised my ledger higher. The nest had been disturbed, yes, but in the end, it hatched something better than revenge, a thriving, small-batch business, a reconciled family that still had to earn each other's trust, and a woman who refused to be small because someone decided she'd be useful only when she was broke. I am Lucy Benson. I took what was buried, made it honest, paid the bills, and then bought myself back. If you ask me whether it was worth the trouble, I will tell you this: when you get to the top of your list and the small lights you set begin to shine, you realize that some kinds of revenge are just a way to make room for the life you should have had all along.